Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, I have Nick Hart, and I'm going to start by letting you have an opportunity to share how we came to be. But I know that you attended this event with the Center for Creative Leadership and the International Leadership Association in Singapore. So maybe tell listeners a little bit about you and what you do. And then I'm excited for this conversation. I think we're going to talk about a context we haven't often discussed on this podcast, but it's a critical context. Sir, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, I'm a school principal from the UK, but based in Dubai at the moment. So I work for an international school group called Cognita, who has schools all across the world. My school is Horizon English School in Dubai. It's one of the highest performing schools in the group and has a great reputation locally in Dubai as well. And I suppose my involvement here is an interest in leadership and leadership development. The CCL, their work, I think, is becoming increasingly picked up by school leaders. And I think there is a really interesting opportunity for school leaders to learn from other domains in what has historically been quite a narrow kind of academic field, if you like. So the opportunity to learn from other industries, I think, is one that this CCL offers school leaders, which hopefully I can elaborate on a little bit today.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for this conversation because I think the attributes, and I'm sure someone's done this research, any person who's in a position of authority. You have an educator, you have a coach, you have a manager, a leader, a parent. I think if we were to do the research across all of those different domains, and what is it that makes a really effective coach or a really effective minister or pastor or spiritual leader, there's commonalities. There's a lot of commonalities, really cool commonalities. I mean, one would be, look, is this person incredibly skilled at building relationships? You're a principal or a teacher working in a classroom or a coach or a minister. That's a skill you need, right? Yeah. So it's fun because, yes, what we're learning in some of these other contexts, I think there's direct application, right?
Definitely. And I think that one on building relationships is particularly important in schools. We've got everyone is leading a group of people at some point. A teacher spends all day, every day, leading a group of students through their learning for the day. And then you've got different layers of leadership that interact in lots of ways. And that's one of the most compelling models that the CCL has made a bit more widespread is that one, the DAC model, the direction, alignment, commitment. And everybody in a school contributes to the direction, the extent to which those efforts are aligned, and then how committed everyone is to doing that, regardless of role. And I like to think that in schools, which are complex adaptive systems, that there is no such thing as a follower. Everyone has a responsibility to nudge us all in a direction that serves ultimate purpose. Schools are social places that we're fulfilling a moral duty of educating the next generation. And so I don't think schools are a place for anyone who isn't willing to step forward and try and move the organization or move a group of students understanding or some colleagues understanding on a little bit.
I really enjoy the direction that the DAC, right? Because
Yes.
again, a coach, what are they trying to do? That a parent, right? I literally last night I had a conversation with my daughter. We just finished midterms in the household and she is being challenged, Nick. She right now is at her edge and it's beautiful to see, but she doesn't understand it right now. And so there's just a lot of emotions. She's a sophomore and things are getting more real as far as college and university and such. And a lot of last night was DAC.
Yeah, were you providing much of the direction?
Trying to influence. I have the relationship with her. That's down. The influence part, it's timing is important. Tone is important. All of that. So what are some of the things that are happening in your school that are exciting for you? I love the fact that we're bringing in some of this thinking from CCL. You've mentioned that. But what are some other things? How are you thinking about this work in that context?
I suppose the starting point is, and I think it's really useful for school leaders and probably leaders of other organizations as well, is to think deeply about the conditions that we work in. My master's study and some prerequisite work towards that through just engaging with people on social media is the idea of organizational complexity. And the schools are certainly that. There's no linear cause and effect. The feedback loops that we get from students and from colleagues are so far away. So I was listening to your podcast with Jonathan talking about short feedback loops. When you're learning a movement, when a child is learning to walk, they get immediate feedback. But as a teacher or a leader in a school, that feedback might not come. It might not come for weeks, months. And it might even be that, and there's some interesting research on this, that a good teacher's influence affects them years down the line and not in the moment. And the idea of learning and performance being different, and that performance in the moment that appears as struggle can actually be an indicator of longer term learning and vice versa. So that the idea of all these blurry feedback loops in schools make it incredibly complex. And so I think the starting point for us as leaders of organizations is that, like, understanding what we're in. What's really frustrating from a school leader point of view is that the dominant leadership narrative, it really is treating the complex as complicated. You've got, for example, a dip in student achievement data. And so therefore you pull a lever, which might be employ better teachers or change the curriculum or change the pedagogical approach or flood with particular resources, and then expect the outcome to change, like a simple cause and effect chain. And that's the dominant narrative. We're forced into thinking that way or behaving that way because of regulators, because of the need for great results in schools. But that's not how it works. And that tension, I think, sits right at the heart of what it means to be a leader of a school.
And you're living that each and every day. I think you're going to Snowden and Boone here. Simple, complicated, complex adaptive challenges. If we go to Heifetz's language, and it's just gray. And what's signal, what's noise, and what do we need to be acting on? What experiments do we need to be running to see if they're moving the needle? Because to your point, I think, and Heifetz talks about that one of the greatest challenges is that leaders treat what he calls adaptive challenges as technical problems.
Technical ones,
right?
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
Yes, yeah. And I like his work. Was interesting as part of my master's. And one of the things he said was, get on the balcony to try and see the whole. But I got a bit of a problem with that because for years we've put up with, or the dominant leadership narrative has been the hero paradigm, right? You've got great leader into behavioral, into traits, that kind of thing. But if that lens stays the same, that leadership is a person, someone who will save the day, and then you pretend about all those other things to do with complexity, like, I'm going to get onto the balcony and look down and I'm going to be the one that figures everything out. It's not how it works. So back to my original point was there is understanding what we're working within. You can't do both. I think there's a real fundamental difference in how we think about the work compared to what the work is, which really needs resolving.
Yeah. I have a guest that's been on a few times, just a wizard. His name is Ron Riggio. And Ron says, in one of the episodes, it has stuck with me. He said leadership, and we can put that in quotes, is co-created by leaders and followers working together. Now we could change some of the language there, but yes, it's not like you are heroically going to jump up on the balcony, look down at the system and say, aha. I think in these cases, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, but this is how I've been framing it recently is, especially in complexity, I think the real work of leaders is to elevate the right questions and even create space for those right questions to be elevated, because they may or may not have the right questions, but at least it's on their radar to be keeping a list of questions of, okay, what are the most pressing questions we need to work to see if we can move the needle? You've been in the meeting before where, the leader has propped up question number 77 out of 100 on the list. And you're like, for real? Everything's burning down, but we're going to talk about this right now? So it's elevating the right questions, but then creating that space where the team has the psychological safety to wander and struggle a little bit with some of those really gnarly questions. We've got the norms and how we're going to have these conversations. And then ultimately, it's what are the experiments we're going to run? What do we think will help move the needle? And then we're going to learn and we're going to fail forward and get feedback and learn and move forward. How do you think about that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, I do. I think there's that the work of leading a school is to try and help people to hold those tensions, to deal with the ambiguity, because that the ambiguity is what cripples people. I think when you see people step into leadership roles in schools, I think an interesting pattern is that typically people succeed if they're able to hold that ambiguity in mind, to see two competing truths at the same time and not implode with the magnitude of variation, that kind of thing. The reason I think it's particularly harder in schools, I'm full disclosure, I've only worked in schools, so I haven't got a particularly good frame of comparison, is that teachers are doing the day job all day, every day. The amount of time available to reflect, to think, to adapt, it just doesn't exist. Teachers across the world are burning out because of workload, because of the complexity of the job. And then when you've got leaders who are trying to help teachers to make better sense of what's going on in classrooms and to build practice that genuinely improves student achievement, when do you do that work? And so is it in twilight sessions after school? Is it in service training days at the beginning of the year or dotted throughout the year? The reality is it's not how it works. And I think teachers who thrive, I think, tend to be really good at naturally and implicitly reflecting on what's happening in front of them and adapting as you go. Same with leaders, really. My problem, I think, as a school leader is, when do you do the development work? When do you do learning development, leadership development? The reality is it's in the day-to-day interactions. You have to try and bring frameworks and heuristics and ways of thinking about things and decision-making strategies into those daily interactions, and not hope for the best, but let emergence happen, provide people with the conditions, the thinking, the strategies, the situations, and hopefully complexity does its thing. And you've got the right people in the organization who really care about student achievement, who want to get better as teachers, want to develop, and you let it run to a certain extent. But I know it's not as simple as that, but that's where I'm leaning towards at the moment.
I don't know if across those three episodes with Jonathan, I just don't remember if we touched on this. And maybe we did, but at times I think, this is no offense to CCL, but you can start with the DAC model. Get it? Yes, that's a thing. Transformational leadership, complex adaptive challenges. You can have those conversations, but how do we scaffold this work? And from the get-go, for these people in positions of authority, coaches, parents, ministers, leaders, what habits of mind do we create as a starting point to do that work that you just said? We can start with theory. We can start with all of those things, but really, and it gets to a really beautiful point on your part of, how do we spend our time? What's going to be the most impactful way of us to spend our time? And if I have a teacher who is mindful, who's critically reflecting, who is paying close attention to the feedback loops that are happening in their environment, adjusting, experimenting, and a heat-seeking missile at building relationships with their students. Wow. Is that kind of getting us closer? Or, again, do we spend our time on other things in that precious time that we have, that very little time we have?
There's an interesting school leadership consideration, a trade-off, if you like. So if I'm taking the position of an outsider of a school, I would make an assumption that the curriculum, the lessons that need planning, that kind of thing, is done expertly in the background. Really careful choice of content, really careful sequencing, really good connections between different ideas across a long period of time. But I think the reality is that a lot of teachers are winging that, or being expected to plan from scratch on their own little section of a student's entire educational journey. This took me a little while to figure out, and I'm still trying to get my head around the implications of this. But some teachers are really good at instruction. They're really good at explaining something. They're really good at getting buy-in from students and, what, like you said, a heat-seeking missile for building relationships. But are they good at designing a series of lessons that get you would make an assumption that they are, but it's not always the case. Some teachers are really good planners, but they are not as good at the delivery. Some teachers are brilliant at the delivery, but terrible at the planning. And I think we have to be careful about that. I think one of the jobs of a school leader is to provide the infrastructure through which teachers can do the thing that they need to be doing every day, which is delivery, instruction, which is responding to students, building relationships, and not then go home and spend another 5 hours designing lessons themselves.
Yes.
Which is the pattern. That's the pattern, is the out of hours work for teachers who care and want to work hard and possibly who are working in schools without infrastructure, is that they're 18-hour days.
And there's some industries, we could go to education, we could pick on healthcare, we could pick on accounting and law, kind of built on this assumption that humans will give a ton of discretionary effort, right? That, to become partner, I'm going to work above and beyond and actually give you a lot of my time over a period of years. And at least what I'm seeing is that millennials and Gen Zs are a little less interested in, I'm not really all that interested in doing all of that to become partner. I'm good. I have a good quality of life. I'm not interested in your working 80 hours a week. And so I love how you're thinking of how do we create the infrastructure where that doesn't have to be the pace, that doesn't have to be the situation or the context, but we're still delivering on those two dimensions that you mentioned.
When you add to that things like wanting to improve something, so that's just the base state. That's just what happens every day. Yes. So when you take into account needing to increase the number of students reaching above age-related expectations, or getting better higher education destinations, or anything else that requires some improvement, that requires teachers and leaders to do something different, whether it is being more efficient or to add something else. And so when you got this murky baseline of what everyone's doing every day, and sometimes it's not particularly clear, and then you add something else, the level of complexity and level of ambiguity raises even more, which makes it even harder. So again, I think our job is to minimalize and to reduce as much as possible from the people that are doing what the organization is there to do. And the organization is there to teach children. But if teachers are working at a level that isn't what they should be dealing with, then that's where I think some issues arise. And Stefan Norvell is writing about this at the moment on Substack, about it's from Jacques levels of work and where complexity sits in an organization. And that's fascinating for me at the moment, about protecting teachers and middle leaders from things that they shouldn't have to worry about, so that they can get on with the things that really matter in the organization. And then those with higher levels of responsibility, who are paid to think with that level of ambiguity and that level of complexity, to let them do that heavy lifting there, so it doesn't cause problems elsewhere.
And if the leaders, the senior leaders, aren't discerning in that way, aren't mindful, then just everything gets filtered through and shows up. And it's just, again, a lot of noise. And how do we ever really get traction? You said something a few moments ago, which, again, maybe some of those things that we need individuals to understand are that we can call them polarities, we can call them tensions. But look, folks, these things are never going away. These tensions will never be eliminated. We're just trying to manage them as much as we can. And sometimes we might overshoot and sometimes we might undershoot, but that's the work of leadership, is managing some of these tensions. But then also, I love what you just said, because I've worked with leaders where there's no umbrella. Everything just flows through to the team, and then it's a shit show. And then you have leaders who can discern that, who can filter that, who can prioritize that, who can scaffold that, and it's a little more manageable.
Absolutely. I think that schools are a bit of a weird microcosm of society as well, because inevitably you get leaders who were teachers and who probably were good teachers at some point, which is typically why they end up getting promoted. So I did this as a first-time principal, as a first-time head teacher. Is I thought, I know what great teaching is. I'm going to try and make every other teacher in my school teach like that. But then that was a crazy mistake to make, because there are lots of different ways to get great outcomes from students. And then, you can expect too much of teachers, but you can have also leaders who are going too far down the chain of operational and sticking their oar in with all sorts of things that they shouldn't have to do, which means that their time is taken away from the systemic condition building work, which never then fixes the root of the problem. And then you just get a cycle of toxicity and kind of burnout.
Yeah. The word that came to swirl, just stuff's swirling, right? I think of the red dot on Jupiter. It's just swirling. At least for a few hundred years now, it's been swirling, right? As we begin to wind down our time, what are a couple other things you're thinking about as you, just so much respect for what you're navigating, the complexity that kind of you're confronted with. And I think at times, at least I've come across some educators who very much like the process and like the rules. And again, when you get to some of these senior levels, it's all gray. It's you're swimming in ambiguity. What should we be prioritizing? I don't even know. And where do we start? It's just complex. What are a couple other things you're thinking about as you're navigating some of these dynamics?
So where in the world I am at the moment, there's a lot of new schools being built, and I'm founding one of them. So in a few months, I'm moving out of my role as a principal of an existing school to become the founding principal of a school that is being built at the moment. And so that provides quite a unique opportunity, because it doesn't typically happen that often when new schools are being built. And so my thinking at the moment is, when you have a chance to build something from scratch instead of adopt what already exists, that presents opportunities to do things a little bit differently, to maybe avoid some of the systemic issues that creates a system that we have in education. But particularly within that, I'm thinking of leadership structure. So schools have a very common pattern of leadership, how it's spread across the school. So you'd have the head teacher or the principal as the top of the organization chart, and then you'd have deputy or assistant head teachers who are part of a senior team. Then you'd have some middle leaders who often teach as well as have some responsibility, like they might be a head of department or a head of a subject or a head of a year group. And then typically that's a funnel for teachers. That's a career path. You go through that hierarchy. But then there's so much to running a school beyond education. There's operations, there's finance, there's human resources, there's recruitment, there's health and safety, there's safeguarding. There's a whole variety of other things outside of the classroom that is required. Where I'm going is that the senior leadership of the school is not just educators, because if you only have educators as the senior team, they cannot possibly have the domain-specific expertise in finance, in human resources, in recruitment, in all those other operational parts of running an organization. And then all of a sudden, what happens in a lot of schools is you get 35-year-old assistant head teachers all of a sudden in charge of health and safety of a school who've never done anything to do with health and safety before. There's a massive risk for an organization when most schools where I am now are 2,000, 3,000 students, 250 members of staff. They're huge organizations that require a lot of coordination, that require a lot of coherent working between different functions. That's what on my mind at the moment, which is challenging the dominant leadership structures of schools, the hierarchy thinking, like the org chart thinking, and using people like Stefan Norvell, who I've just met on LinkedIn, really interesting work he's doing, building on Jacques' work of levels of work and various other things to try and build a leadership team that is a bit more reflective of the ontological reality of schools, which is complexity. And you can't just whack a hierarchy, an organization chart and say, off you go, deal with that. I'm in a very unique position at the moment to be able to build an organization and a structure that hopefully can mitigate some of the complexities and try something a little bit different. I've got a year and a half before it opens, so plenty of time
You got some time
to figure it out.
You have some more conversations in Reddit. What should I do, folks? What do y'all think?
Yeah.
I always wind down these conversations by asking guests what they've been listening to, streaming. It could be something you've been reading. It could have something to do with what we've just discussed. It might have nothing to do with what we've just discussed. But what's caught your attention in recent times that might be interesting for listeners?
Yeah, so I have a couple of work-related ones. One is, I've referenced it a couple of times, the idea of levels of complexity in an organization. And this is where I think I'm appreciating thinking from outside of education, because I don't think you get educators thinking in those ways. Originally, I think Jacques' work in the late 80s that I'm trying to pick apart thanks to Stefan Norvell on Substack. And I'm also looking at decision making. So with a lot of how organizations are set up with hierarchies and leadership, line management, that kind of thing. There's often who's responsible for that thing, like who is accountable when that thing goes wrong? Who do you point at when something has stopped working? But in the last year or so, I've been looking at a racy matrix for responsibilities, accountabilities, and who's consulted and who's informed. But I'm not particularly pleased with that. And so picking up again through reading on social media, some different models of that and starting to look at the DARE model from McKinsey now, which is trying to place decision making to try and make, this is particularly relevant for me, I think, as a founding principle of a new school. A lot of what happens from what I hear in new schools is when you've got a whole bunch of people together for the first time, for the first few weeks and months, and there aren't cultural or ingrained ways of working, you can quite easily have people turn around and go, I don't know, who decides? And then they all go to you as the principal. And what I'm quite keen to establish straight away is who decides stuff. Like, what are the decisions that need to happen every day? Who decides, and push that as low down as possible, and to try and provide some clarity on that. I'm really interested in reading about these things at the moment, and school holidays do provide an opportunity to do that. So we're on a 4-week break at the moment for winter, and so the opportunity to read, step aside, think, reflect is just invaluable.
I was reminded of, I don't know how much you've read how Bezos thinks about decision making. It's a really interesting, I'll put some articles in the show notes for listeners, but you may not agree with everything that he says, and you might not like Jeff Bezos. But what's interesting is people like him and Jensen Huang, they have very clear principles about what is the process of how we're going to navigate some of this ambiguity. He calls them one-way doors and two-way doors. So they have a rule at Amazon, or they had a rule at Amazon, that we don't have a committee larger than 2 pizzas could feed. So there's just these different ways that they think about problem solving. And for instance, another one is that in the context of Amazon, a person who owned the challenge would bring a memo, and the decision makers would read the memo in real time. So all their heads were in the same space. And then Bezos would sit back and not really intervene all that much. He'd watch the conversation, but then they also had a rule that was disagree but commit.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is the right path, but I'm committed once we walk out this door to try and do the meetings after the meeting type stuff. So I love that you're thinking about that, because it's If we have some clarity around how we're going to do the work and people are given permission at different levels, what a wonderful opportunity for you to experiment with building a system that does it differently, that
Absolutely.
better, right? That's a cool opportunity.
It is. It's a career defining one, I think, an opportunity of a career. And so I'm really grateful to have it and to make the most of it.
Nick, thank you so much for the work you do in the world to make the world a better place. We appreciate you. I appreciate you being with me today. Thank you so very much, sir. And best of luck as you start to build, literally and figuratively.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, be well. What a wonderful opportunity for Nick to build in the way that he's building. What I love here is you've got a really beautiful theory to practice kind of situation. And in some ways, practice the theory. Nick is taking on this challenge of building a totally new school. And how do I do that in a different way? How do I design for a culture in 2026 where young people can thrive? Absolutely love it. So excited to hear how this story unfolds. Nick, thank you so much for the work that you do in our world. Thanks for the conversation today. I definitely appreciate it. And to all of you, happy 2026. This is going to be a great year. Take care. Be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.